educator for this module. And I'm looking forward to sort of teaching you guys. Again, my teaching philosophy is not me standing on the stage, knowing everything. It is not me being the expert, but it is more of a facilitator. And saying that, I do believe in allowing you to learn at your own pace, allowing you to learn when you need to learn and when you want to learn. So I will provide a lot of details, a lot of content per week, focused on the outcomes for that week. There'll be case studies, there'll be quizzes, there'll be all kinds of things for you to be able to do, class discussions, for you to be able to engage in, video overviews, and so forth, for you to engage in different ways in order to work through the material. I know the structure of this. SACAP has 3 types of teaching methods or contact type sessions. The way they call this online flexi, which means that it is, we don't meet regularly, although I believe that for a subject like this, we will most probably meet each week. And then there's online full-time, I think, which is sort of sessions during the day. And then there's fully online where there's no contact. So if you guys can just give me a bit of a breakdown just in terms of where you're at. Are you sort of working adult? Are you studying part-time? Are you studying full-time? And this is one of the modules that you're taking, but it's like at an odd time, just to give me an idea of where you guys are at. Maybe Thomasina will go first. Where's your sound?
Oh, apologies.
No problem.
Schoolgirl error there. Good evening, Mr. Wilscott. Thank you for that introduction and summary about your background and the expectations. Good evening to you, Gugu, as well. So I am currently working. I've been working for a while. I'm in the banking industry, employed as a personal assistant. So this is one of my modules that I'm doing as part of my course.
Okay.
I've taken up the business management as psychology and business management as a major. And I haven't studied in a very long time, so this is quite daunting. I don't know what else I'm missing out. So I'm doing this part-time.
Okay.
So I do have kids as well. I have 3 kids. So yeah, this is on a part-time basis.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Absolutely. Google. Google has gone off and we're going to make some tea. Okay, we'll wait. That would be Sisipo, would be a lady, huh? Musina?
It can actually go both ways.
Both ways, yeah.
Oh, it's yeah, okay. Yes, it can go both ways. Yeah, I've learned as well.
Okay, that's Sutu.
Sisipo can be Xhosa, it can be
well.
Zulu.
Okay. Which makes sense. Okay. All right, let me then just open up my PowerPoint here and we can go from there. I just want to make sure. Yeah.
What is your preference? Is it cameras off or cameras on?
It doesn't really matter. For me, it is sometimes a bit better if your camera is off, simply because it just improves the reception sometimes, especially if you're sort of dialing in. So that's one. Yeah. And obviously, if you want to ask a question, you can just pop it on again. And then that's good to be able to see who I'm speaking to. Yeah. But otherwise, I'm comfortable with having it on or off, just depending on you. Can you see me? You can see me sort of a slide on the one side and my
Yes,
face sort of on the other
correct.
side, and
Correct.
that's okay.
Yes.
All right. So the session is being recorded, and let me first start off by sort of just giving a brief overview of how I'm going to do certain things. So the first thing is module engagement. So with module engagement, I've got how many? I've got 8 quizzes which I've put together. I'm actually thinking I'm pushing that to 10, but 8 I think would be good. Because there's 2 weeks in which there is some other assessments and stuff, so I don't want to have quizzes running for those weeks. And what will happen is that I will then put together the quiz. It's 15 questions. You've got 60 minutes in order to complete those questions. You can then, you've got 2 opportunities. So the first time, if you don't make it for 80%, you can then complete it the second time in order to get 80%. So that's the quiz. If you complete 5 out of the 8, you'll get your 20% of your. You'll have to pass the 5, and then that will count towards your module engagement mark, which is 20% of the module engagement mark. And I find and those will have a deadline. The deadline will be at the end of week 10. So you will have from now till the end of week 10 to complete them. Please don't leave them until week 10 and then one night sit and do 5 quizzes. You're going to stress yourself out. So try not to do that. And just do them as they, I'll be loading them sort of every week, every second week, I'll be loading all of them. And I'll try to load as many of them between now and next week so that all of them are up and running for you to be able to complete, even if you want to jump ahead and just do like 2 or 3, then you know I'm ahead with those. So that's the one. And then the second thing is that in terms of our assessments, so as you know, the assessments is for this course is quite interesting, in which you have 4 almost like mini assessments, which is open book assessments that you complete. And each one, all of those will then count 40%. So it's 40, 20 module engagement, and then the last 40 is your final submission, which is a bigger assignment as the final submission. And that's really the assessments. And I want your focus to be on the assessments, especially for some of you that are mature students, part-time students, that have families, that have work that have full-time work. It's about focusing on the assessments. Get through the assessments. Make sure that you get done to do the assessments. Make sure that you submit the assessments, even if they're not perfect, even if they're not 100%. Don't just do them. This is not a difficult course, depending on which direction you come from. It does require, it's a bit of a combination of 2 separate courses, and the way I'm going to teach it is going to try to make it very relevant for you in a business context, and for some students that might have just come straight out of school, it might be different for you, but just know that I'm going to try to make it relevant so that you can understand these very sort of. Economics is one of those courses or economics as a subject area is one of those subject areas which you either like and you understand it. So it's one of those things you either get or you don't get it. And for those that don't get it, they don't like it. They go, I don't understand it. It's just, let me move on to something else. But let me explain to you that it is one of the most important areas of understanding, the most important subject areas that actually influences your day-to-day life. So when they said at school that, maths is going to be important and that it's part of your day-to-day life and everything is maths, algebraic equations is an everyday part of your everyday life. But economics it affects everything. It affects what you pay at the grocery store. It affects the amount of taxes you pay. It affects how much salary you earn. It affects how much food you can buy. It affects everything. It affects your cost of living. It affects where you go to school. It affects every single part of your life. And that is what we use economics for. It is an area of study to understand these things, these sort of ethereal stuff that floats around, these big concepts. And at its heart, economics is about what we call scarcity. Now, there's two concepts around scarcity, or two approaches to scarcity. The one approach is that there is no such thing as scarcity, as in there isn't unlimited wants and limited means. And that concept means, which is a very different concept, it's more humanistic idea that there's unlimited means. There is enough for everyone and more. At the heart of economics, though, is this idea of scarcity, that there is unlimited wants, which means there's a lot of people, there's a lot of needs, but there's only so many resources to satisfy those needs. And that's where economics, and that's the direction economics come from. Economics is a social science. That's why it's part of your course. It is a social science, just like management is a social science. And when we talk about social sciences, it is about individuals. It's about people. It's about societies. It's about communities. It's about how we relate to each other. And economics is just a set of rules. Economists like to think that it's a set of rules, but it's actually more a set of guidelines. They're not strict rules, and they work most of the time in most situations. That's why we call them rules, quote unquote. Economics is nothing to do with money. It's nothing to do with finance. It is all to do with choices, the choices we make, and the choices government make, the choices that organizations make. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions at this point before we jump into going a bit deeper?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. Thank you. But very interesting that it has nothing to do with money, but more about choices. So that's quite an interesting learning.
Absolutely. No, good. So the fundamental problem is, as I said, scarcity. The reality is that scarcity exists because resources are finite. And when we talk about resources, we talk about natural resources, we talk about human resources, and we talk about money. We talk about financial resources, because those are your three key resources: human, natural, and financial resources. And those are finite. There's only so much money in the world. There's only so many people in the world that can provide labor, and there's only so much natural resources in the world. However, we have what we then talk about needs versus wants. So needs versus wants. Needs is essential for survival. If you can still remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Maslow talked about, at the bottom of his hierarchy, he talks about his fundamental set of needs, which is about food and shelter. And then as you move up, those needs about belonging. And right at the top is about self-actualization. So when we talk about needs, it also moves up in this hierarchy until you get to wants, which is the desires for comfort and luxury. And the consequences of that is we can't have it all. Scarcity forces choice. And within the South African context, if you consider Eskom's capacity, when we still had load shedding, when electricity is scarce, we must do rotation, load shed, in which there's choice. There's only so much electricity, and in order to stretch the electricity, in order to make sure that everyone gets some electricity, we had to rotate and load shed. So this course looks at economics from two different lenses, which is, I call it the forest and the trees. Microeconomics, so think of micro, which is small. Microeconomics is the tree. It's the study of individual units, households, firms, specific markets. And really there we talk about price movement, we talk about specific products, wages in specific industries and so forth. It is more on a micro basis. It looks at those type of movements. And that is also the place where we're going to use a bit of numbers That is where we use a bit of Excel to play around with the numbers to see actual movement and how these things interact, like a demand curve, demand and supply curves, and so forth. And that is where economics become sort of feels like math a bit. It feels like the calculations, these numbers and things, and in interaction. But once again, it's about choices. If you choose this, if demand goes up, what happens to supply? If demand goes up and supply comes down, what happens to price? How's the interaction between those three things? Whereas macroeconomics is more the forest. It is thinking about the big picture. Macro, I would call it big. It's a study of the economy as a whole. We look at the things that you would know of. It looks at things like GDP. It would look at things like inflation, CPI, unemployment rate. These are the big things. But ultimately, they're interconnected. They're connected to one another. If we look at unemployment, if unemployment goes up, it means that there are fewer people with disposable income to buy the products that companies make, which means that demand will then come down for their products. And if demand comes down for their products, then there's an oversupply of a product. If there's an oversupply, the price will come down for it. We look at things like inflation. Inflation is prices going up. Why do prices go up? Because there is maybe more money in the economy. GDP, which is gross domestic product, goes up. The economy grows. There's high employment. There's more disposable income. Wages goes up. Unemployment rate comes down. When wages goes up, there's more disposable income, which means that demand goes up. And if demand goes up, what happens to the supply? And the supply doesn't go up with the demand, then the price will go up. So then you will have inflation. And when you have inflation, the government will then have to do something about it. And when they have inflation, microeconomics, the government will then make a decision. We will then reduce the amount of free money or money in the system. And how do you reduce the amount of money in the system? By increasing the interest rate. Increase the interest rate, the amount of disposable income gets reduced, the amount of loans that are issued gets reduced, which means demand will decrease, GDP will go down, and that will then cause that there's lower demand. If there's lower demand, what happens to price? Price comes down, which means that inflation comes down. And those are the interactions between macroeconomics, which is the forest, and microeconomics, which is the trees, and the interaction between them. Now, economists will tell you that there's lots of fancy formulas and there's all kinds of things that you can look at and interactions, but a lot of these theories, a lot of these guidelines, a lot of these sort of lenses that we look at the world through is specific to specific sort of context, and they do change. They have impact in a different way, what we call unintended consequences. So as I said to you earlier, we were talking about microeconomics. So that's the small part. Microeconomics, the key question, how much should we pay a new person based on talent supply in this town? So that's a simple question. If there's lots of people in the town looking for work, what will happen to wages? Wages will come down. If there's fewer people with a specific skill, the price of that labor will go up. Should a spaza shop owner raise the price of bread? Well, it depends. What is demand for? Variables are supply and demand of specific goods, production cost, and also how much money does a spaza shop owner want to make on their bread. Obviously, if they push the price up, there's competition around them, and they will lose their sales. So it's about efficiency. It's about efficiency within the company. It's about efficiency in terms of maximizing profit. How much do we need to sell vis-a-vis the amount of profit that we want to make or the value that we want to deliver to our stakeholders? When we think about macroeconomics, we think about it from a governmental point of view. We think about it from a more population-wide point of view, countrywide, region-wide, globally. And we look at the central bank, South African Reserve Bank, and the question is, what does a change in the repo rate affect the borrowing cost for business? So what is the repo rate? The repo rate is the amount that the central bank, SARS, charge in interest to commercial banks. And then commercial banks then have a margin between that percentage, which is the repo rate, and the commercial interest that they charge us to borrow for a bond, to buy a car, on our credit card. And the difference between them is what the bank then takes as their margin, or the marginal rate, or the what we would call their particular profit that they will make. Obviously, they'll make profit on other things as well. But really, that is where. So the SARB sets the repo rate, and then the commercial banks then borrow at that rate, and then they then mark it up with between 2 to 3%. And that's the difference between what you would get from the bank for your bond and for borrowing money from them. But that repo rate is determined by what? How does national inflation impact labor union wage demands? So national inflation is the price of goods, inflation rates. And labor unions, when they negotiate, they want the wages to grow ahead of what the inflation is, because that's what they call real wages, because they know that 100 Rand today is not the same as 100 Rand in a year's time due to inflation. Inflation is the prices of everything going up between today and a year from now. So they know that if they want real wage increase, it needs to be a percentage higher than inflation. If inflation is 3%, then they will negotiate for 5 to 6 to 7% in order for it to be more than what the inflation is. What does the business do? The business want to keep it at the rate of inflation, or even lower than inflation if they can, because then they will be able to contain and reduce their cost of manufacturing, of delivering services. So it's always that tension. When we talk about inflation versus wage increases, we talk about repo rate versus the commercial rate. And then finally, the impact is that the forest, high inflation, is on fire, and the tree, which is your business, is at risk if there's high inflation, which means high costs, high prices. You as a business are buying these raw materials, and suddenly all these raw materials, the prices go up and they go up and they go up due to maybe geopolitical risk, maybe due to import costs, maybe due to exchange rate fluctuation and so forth. Right there on input costs, and now suddenly the union comes in and say, your cost as a business has increased by 6%. Your internal inflation was 6%. Through no fault of yours, through just the inflation that has come through the back door from your suppliers, if you're making a product in South Africa. And now the union comes to you and say, we want an increase of 10%. And you say, no. You say, well, in that case, we're going to go and strike. And now there's a trade-off. You have to decide, are you going to give the 10%? Because if you give a 10% on your wages, that will have an impact on this cost that's already at 6%. It will maybe push the cost up to 20% to 8% and so forth. How much is your customer willing to buy at a higher price next year, depending on which industry you're in? So now you begin to see how macroeconomics and microeconomics interconnect. Do you have any questions? Let me just pause there for a minute, and you can maybe jump in.
It makes sense, yeah, on how the two work together. And I like how you've actually also put it there that, you know, when you think micro, you think smaller, and when you think macro, you think bigger, so worldwide, so globally, and more broader than just our businesses, household, etc. And just how the two interlink.
Okay, awesome, great. Has Sisipo, have you arrived yet? Okay, there's still a mute there. Okay, no problem. So that's really the difference between the two. And when we look at something like, say, for instance, Shoprite increases the price of bread, is that because of, we don't know. Is it because of something internally within Shoprite, microeconomics, or is it something externally outside of Shoprite, macroeconomics? And it can be either or of them. So macroeconomics, there is a war in Europe, in Ukraine. Russia is the second biggest exporter of potash. Now you ask, what the heck is potash? Potash is the biggest ingredient in making fertilizer. So if Russia cannot export its potash, which means the price of fertilizer is going to go up. Fertilizer is a big contributor to the production of wheat. And if fertilizer prices go up, it means that the production of wheat goes up significantly, which means that the price of flour goes up, which means the price of bread will go up. All because of something that has happened on the other side of the world, something that's completely out of our hands. Unfortunately, Russia is the second biggest supplier of potash. Or it could be something internally within Shoprite. It could be that they needed to adjust their price because there is internal pressures within Shoprite. The union had a big sort of push on pricing and on wages, and wage increases came through. Shoprite also had a big expansion to increase the size of their warehouse, and all of these additional costs is now finding its way into the prices of their products. So that's microeconomics. South African unemployment rates reached 32%. Macro, it could be because Shoprite's prices has increased. Now they have lower sales. Now they make less profit. Now they have to let and shed some people. Microeconomics. Macroeconomics, it could be that there is some employment policies that the South African government had decided on, and some companies then let people go because they can't afford to hold onto them. Or it could be that the South African sort of economy is not growing enough, and there's a lot of people coming into the workforce after school, and there's insufficient jobs for them. So the unemployment increases. So GDP, which then talks to macroeconomics. The government increases VAT. Why would the government increase VAT? Because they have insufficient tax collection, because the GDP, the gross domestic product, is insufficient. The economy isn't growing enough. Not enough people are employed, so they're not paying sufficient taxes. Companies isn't growing, so they're not paying sufficient taxes. So the government now has a shortfall between how much they collect and how much they need to spend, which is the annual budget. And that shortfall is what we call the budget deficit. That budget deficit then needs to be shrunk. It needs to be kept within a certain margin, because external agencies that look at our government as a company, they say that, listen, I want you to keep your budget deficit at a certain percentage, because if it's more than that, then we worry that, just like a household, if your budget deficit is too big, then we might have to put you under debt review. And if the South African government's budget deficit gets too big, we will be put under debt review. literally. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank will come in and say, you clearly can't manage your finances, so we're going to have to intervene here and start cutting and decreasing your expenditure, so that this deficit that sits in the middle between how much money you collect and how much money you spend gets decreased. A student decides buying a car, investing in stock, macroeconomics, microeconomics, supply and demand. Labor unions demand higher wages across the mining sector due to inflation. Macroeconomics, it will also have an impact on the firm as well. So earlier I was talking about decisions, and economics is also about, it's all about making decisions. It is what we call the true cost of decision making. There's a chosen path and there's a foregone path, what we call a foregone path. And then this has to do with opportunity cost, which is the value of the best alternative foregone when a choice is made. So what does that mean? It simply means that there's no such thing as a free lunch. For every decision that you make, for every chosen path, there is a lost opportunity of something that did not happen due to the decision that you made. And there's two types of cost to that foregone path or to that place where you did not go to, which is what we call explicit cost and implicit cost. There is direct monetary payments and the value of resources used without direct payment. So for instance, if you watch the video which I posted, it is a student. A student decides to go and study. Tandy decides to go and study, and she decides, listen, I'm going to go and study for 3 years rather than go to work. Now, the chosen path is there's a cost to that chosen path. There's study fees, there's rent that needs to be paid, and there's also then the value of the things that you did not get. So those are all the costs. So then there's the implicit cost. There's the time lost. So you've lost, quote unquote, 3 years of your life in which you could have worked. And in that time that you've worked, you could have gained wages. So for instance, you would have earned, say, 200,000, or you would have earned 160,000 or 100,000 per year of your studies while working. And also in that time, you would have gained more skills. You would have maybe gotten a promotion. So over those 3 years, you would have sort of earned maybe 300,000 or 400,000. But instead of earning that money, that lost, that foregone choice, instead of earning that money, you spending on the other side of that, the choice that you've made, you're spending the opportunity. So that was the opportunity cost that you've lost. You've lost 400,000. And on the other side, you've spent maybe 60,000 times 3, 180 plus the rent. You've spent 500,000 on the other side of it. So now you have to ask yourself, after 3 years, am I better off? Has my life improved? I studied. She decided to go and study. Have my life improved? You can only really answer that with economics through time, because maybe because she went to go and study, the next 7 years, she will earn more than what she would have earned without a degree. And in 7 years, she would not only have earned that 400,000 that she lost by not working for 3 years, but she would earn significantly more because she has a degree, and she'll make up that 400,000 plus an additional million on top of that because she has a degree for the next 7 years. And that's really what we call the opportunity cost, because in economics, there's no such thing as a free lunch. For every decision that you make, for every path that you choose, there is a cost, which is the opportunity cost for the path that you did not choose. So after 10 years, Tandy would need to sit down and if she does an accounting, she has to ask herself, by me making this decision, am I in the plus or am I in the minus? Because if she's in the minus, then clearly it was not the right decision. But if she's in the plus, then it was a better decision to make. Governments have to make these decisions all the time when they allocate budgets each year. And now you understand why the budget discussion and allocation of funds within the budget is so wrought with just politics and with this push and pull. Do we increase the education budget so that we have better educational outcomes, so better people that, they can study, increase our overall intellectual capital? Or do we put in more money into our healthcare system so that we have fewer people, so we can heal people quicker and make sure that people get back to work a lot easier and quicker, and therefore increase our productivity? But we can't do both because we only have so much money that we collect. And how do we allocate that money? And those four things are always within national budgets. Those four things are always the tension: healthcare, education, police, community policing or policing, and then wages. The amount of money that we're spending on the government itself. So those four things. If we spend more money on education, we will have better education outcomes, which means we will have more people within the job market that can be employed. More educated, better outcomes. But if you don't have an economy that grows, doesn't matter how good your outcomes is, if there's no jobs for those people, then they're still going to sit on the pavement. More money into healthcare means that people can be healed quicker and get back to work a lot faster in order to improve and increase productivity. Because we go our healthcare system at the moment, and that is why the focus is on primary healthcare, to make sure that those people get back to work a lot faster rather than sort of being at home for too long. And then there's policing, it's about safety, community safety, and then it's about how many people are actually going to do all of this work, which is the government wage budget as well. So that's what we call sort of opportunity cost. So let me just pause there quickly. Are there any questions at this juncture?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Okay, great. I hope the pace is okay. I'm not running too far. It is, too quickly. So here's an example of Bonolo. I talked about Tandy, but Bonolo can also be Tandy. Maybe Bonolo Tandy. Choose university, which is option A, over job. Explicit cost, which is the tuition, books, and all of that. And then the implicit cost, which is the lost salary. So the total economic cost to her is 88,000 in this example, because it is not just what you pay explicit, but it's also what you're losing, opportunity cost implicit. So the total cost is that. Always calculate what is lost, revenue foregone, not just what is spent from a business point of view. It is not just our revenue, but it's also our lost revenue. How did we lose revenue? Maybe there was orders that came in that couldn't be fulfilled. There were maybe orders placed that we couldn't do because we didn't stock that particular product. So all of these are lost opportunities or lost revenue. Another sort of in this week, so now we've talked about opportunity cost, which talks to scarcity. Another one, which is the production possibility curve, which is PPC. It's another one of those models and one of those things to sort of try to understand economics from both a macro and a micro perspective. It's a model showing the maximum attainable combination of two goods that can be produced, which means, again, those two things that we talked about. Opportunity cost. So here we look at here we look at potatoes, kilograms per day, which is, say, 100 potatoes per day. And then we look at baskets of fish per day. And the question is, and this curve then says that, what's the best possible outcome for us, where we can get the most fish per day and the most potatoes per day? Because, again, scarcity. If you go for the most potatoes per day, you will end up losing the amount of fish that you can possibly fish. Now, say for instance, this is a person, there's two laborers, and one goes into the field to go and harvest potatoes, and the other one goes onto the lake, onto the dam to go and fish. If both of you go and fish, if both of you go to the collect potatoes in the morning for maybe 2 hours, but then for the rest of the day fish, then it means that you might only be able to collect 40 kilograms for the morning, but then you go and spend the whole day on the lake or on the dam, and you get 4 baskets of fish. But you can't do both. You can't get the maximum amount of fish and the maximum amount of potatoes per day, because there's only 2 of you, and there's only there's only so many hours in a day, because the amount of land, the amount of labor, and the amount of capital are all fixed scarcity. Technology is constant, and full employment of resources. There's only 2 of you to be able to do that. And at time, you have to make a decision, which one is better for you. Do you want more potatoes? So maybe the price of potatoes goes up, and you decide, no, you know what? For the next period, more potatoes would be a better option. But then we forego opportunity cost, the amount of fish that we can do, which means that we might make more money on potatoes, but we will also lose. So if this is the best possible one, let's see there. And that is the best possible one, that one, which is maybe 50 kilograms and 3.5 basket of fishes. That's the best possible balance between the two. Every time I make a decision to harvest more potatoes, then I will end up having to forego the amount of fish. And that is that idea that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Every time you make a choice, there is something that you have to forego. There is the opportunity cost of something else. And you can look at the production. There is a video which I've included, which explains it a bit more and in a bit more detail. So it's about efficiency versus inefficiency. So where's the best possible, the most efficient way, which is the full use of resources and the most productive efficiency, which is sort of sitting over there. Sort of sitting over there. I know I said there maybe, but there you get the most potatoes and you sort of get 2 baskets out of 5, which is sort of just under 50%. Most efficient use, the most productive use of labor and all of the resources. Point B is the most inefficient, which is over there. And then point C is impossible because you don't have the resources. You've got not sufficient resources in order to get to C. And this is, again, back to the statement which I made earlier, it's about choices. You have to make a decision. You have to make a choice as to how you're going to do this. How you're going to harvest potatoes versus fishing for the fish. And the most efficient one would be then on the line would be about 90 kilos of potatoes and 2 baskets of fish. However, the trade-off is this. The trade-off is the loss opportunity cost lies where, we did not do fewer potatoes versus fish, because you can decide to fish more. But when you decide to fish more, then you will lose all of this potatoes? You know, I know it sounds a bit the whole potato fish story. Just to give, so think of it as a potato farm sitting next to a dam, and there's two of you, your husband and wife, and you can only do so much a day. You can either go and harvest potatoes the whole day, but that means you're not going to be able to go and fish. You can go out in the morning, go and fish the whole day. That means you won't be able to harvest your potatoes. And you kind of have to find the most efficient between the two. But do realize that if you decide to fish more, there's an opportunity cost, a loss opportunity for the amount of potatoes that he could possibly have harvested on the other side. And you need to work on this law of increasing opportunity cost. The curve goes outward because you can see it goes out. Sorry, I'm doing this with my mouse. There we go. Resources are not perfectly adaptable. A potato farmer is not equally efficient at fishing. So that's a trade-off. Moving along the curve means sacrificing one good to gain another. And that is how the two interact: production possibility curve and opportunity cost. So shifting the PPC, that is economic growth. So ultimately, what you want to do is you want to move out, you want to increase the possibilities, which means that is what we call economic growth. You want to increase the quantity of resources, skills through education. You want to improve the technology. Maybe instead of harvesting by hand, you're now harvesting with a machine, because if you're harvesting with a machine, you can do more in the same amount of time, so you're more productive. So that's technology. And therefore, by shifting everything outward, you can then increase your consumer goods as well as your, what we call, the capital goods. However, when the economy shrinks and it goes the other way, that means that there is a decrease in productivity. We've got insufficient skills, we've got insufficient resources in order to harvest more potatoes and to fish more, increase our consumer goods and increasing our capital goods. So it's all about making micro decisions. It's about scarcity. It's about macro influence, the ZAR, the USD exchange rate, and it's about opportunity cost. And those are really the four sort of things in your toolkit that for this first session that I want to sort of just to grapple with. One is scarcity. There's limited resources, unlimited wants and needs. Micro versus macro, it's the lens that we use to look through it. It's a tree in the forest, and that is how we analyze. And then opportunity cost, which is a real cost, is the value of the alternative foregone. If you make a decision, just think of it, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The real cost is not just how much you're paying, implicit cost or explicit cost, but also the implicit cost, the things that you're losing and possibly could have gained on the other side, needs to be added to get to the real cost, and that is the implicit cost. And then the PPC model, which is production possibility curve, which is a model of visualizing the efficiency and potential growth. And next week we'll look at supply and demand, which is another microeconomic staple, the interaction of supply and demand and price, and how those interact with each other. Any questions?
It's actually what I wanted to ask. When you were talking about opportunity cost, whether there is a way of incorporating supply and demand in order to determine or to predict, whether you go and harvest the potatoes or do you rather go for the fish? Or is this all dependent on where inflation, macroeconomics go? Is there a way to predict? Okay. And I know, you spoke about it also depends on the skills, the resources, the technology. And as the business grows over time, maybe then you can employ, extra hands in order to do more.
Yep. And then that's a good point. So next week when we do, and it has to do with supply and demand. So if back to the potato and fish scenario, if you as a farmer and a fisherman, if you decide if the supply for potatoes increases, which means if the demand for potatoes increases, which means the price goes up, you will then have to do the calculation to say that if I, as you say, if I fish less, will that opportunity cost of the fewer fish, the cost of that fewer fish that I would have been able to sell, would the demand and the price increase on the potatoes be more than what I'm going to lose? Because then that's a real cost. You can't just go, oh, the price of potatoes is going up, I'm going to harvest more potatoes. And not calculating the real cost, which is the decision that you're making, which is the foregone, the opportunity cost of the fish that you're not selling now. So if you want to really know whether you're going to make money, you need to understand, yes, the demand for potatoes is going up, the price has gone up, but even if I sell more, will that cover what I'm not selling on fish? Because if it doesn't, then you don't do it.
Yeah.
You know, don't do it.
Yeah.
But you know, that's a very simple example, but that's what companies grapple with every day. Those are the type of decisions, those are the type of trade-off decisions that you grapple with every day. And when we do when we do supply and demand, and you get to price elasticity and all of those type of things, now things get a little more interesting, because now you get into the weeds of it, of microeconomics. And then a bit more, then the production possibility curve will make a bit more sense in that respect. Right.
Thank you
Yes.
for that. Thank you. And then I was wondering, in Tandi's scenario with regards to the studying, you know, given the economic climate or setup that we're currently living in, because you calculated, yes, okay, fine, she decides to go to school versus going to go and work. But in cases whereby there is actually no employment, and then she decides to go and take up that loan, and what would there be an implicit cost in this? Or I guess, yeah. I
Yes.
guess that's what I was trying to understand.
Yes. And if you want to make it become more personal, it's a decision that all matriculants are sitting with now and their families. Yes, I can send you to school, but will you get a job afterwards? Or just going to work a ShopRite for the next year and possibly get promoted to supervisor, and in 3 years' time you might be a floor manager and earn a decent wage without having to pay back 150,000 rand in loans.
Yeah, very true. And you know, as you indicated at the beginning of the session as well, it's really stuff that we can apply to our everyday life, because as you were going through some of the scenarios, I'm like, okay, here I am, so many years later, I'm studying again. Yes, you know, opportunity costs as well involved in this because now I'm trying to elevate my profile. What do I need to do to elevate my profile? I need to go back to school. What are the costs? You know, less time spent with family, less time doing, you know, the things that I love, and obviously a whole lot, the list goes on. But yeah, it's interesting how everything just interlinks. And when you were talking about the war in Russia, I was thinking back to the time whereby we were almost paying about 200 Rand for 2 liter of oil.
Yes, absolutely. And we're staring at the potential war in Iran at the moment. And if that war comes through, the price of oil is going to spike again. And once the price of oil is such there's 2 things that you look at in the world, 3 things that affects us directly. Two is the big ones. One is the dollar rand exchange rate, and 2 is the price of oil. Those 2 things affects us immediately almost. The rand weakens, fuel goes up, everything else goes up. The price of oil goes up, and the rand weakens, then we're in for like a double, like somebody slapping you both sides in the face. Because then the price of oil goes, the price of fuel goes up, and if the price of fuel goes up, then everything goes up. Because remember, every single bread, every single kilo of flour, every single chocolate, everything is driven around on the back of a truck. And the cost of fuel, diesel, determines a lot of our cost of products that we buy, our food that we eat, and everything. So those two on a macro level, those are the two things that you almost have to look at daily, because it will tell you exactly what's going to happen in 2 months or 3 months time from now. It's almost like a crystal ball.
Mm.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time, Tinsina. I appreciate that you took the time to log in. I will also post this video for the rest of the class. And I hope that everybody gets onto the WhatsApp group so that we can sort of just connect and so forth. Yeah, get stuck into those assessments. They're fairly straightforward. They're not too challenging. Depends.
No, thank you very much. We'll use your advice as far as possible to try and get them done as quick as possible, because I know how it can be trying to rush through everything just to get it in. Yeah, then, yeah.